Last month, a reporter called to ask if I was a Navy Reserve captain who retired in September of 1999. Apparently, a recently departed Iowa State official had borrowed generously from my retirement remarks made in his letter of resignation. There was no doubt about it. Perhaps I should have been outraged, but I couldn't quite work up the energy for it, especially since it turned out well for me. My talk had lain dormant on my webpage for 14 years, without attracting interest from anyone other than my students who I forced to read it. It was certainly not on its way to being published online, but I registered just in time for my high school reunion. And as Charlie would say, not to be coy, it was pretty good. And as Sam would say, with all due respect, he shouldn't have done it. But the experience caused me to think about what is original and what is valuable. Having on-the-job training with great sociologists, I realized that what we need, of course, is a 2x2 table by which we can array these variables so we can think about them constructively. If we were to array all of our academic work in such a table, I wonder how much of it would be both original and valuable, especially as genuine progress tends to be incremental. Still, we hope to say something important that is important theoretically or practically. This afternoon, however, I will settle for hopefully interesting. In past presidential addresses, I have discussed the need for scholarly excellence, surely preaching to the choir on that subject. The need to expand the reach of the IUS in terms of disciplines, representation, and geography, and the importance of leading important, relevant discussions in the public square. One year I expressed my dismay that some academic disciplines would sanction their members who would assist the military in any way. When thinking about what we want to accomplish and how we want to be remembered, we all establish priorities. The three obvious categories are our scholarship, our students, and our contribution to the discipline. For many, the best strategy is to focus on one of these and make as much progress as possible in that area. There is nothing wrong with this, but I made a different choice. I have had the privilege of teaching at a great Jesuit university for many years, and I cannot resist a bit of scripture at this point. The wise old preacher, Ecclesiastes, advised as follows. He said, "In the morning sow your seed, and in the evening withhold not your hand. For you know not which will prosper in this or that, or whether both alike will be good." I've taken that advice to heart and tried to make progress on all three fronts. How well I did is obvious to judge, but I have a deep sense of satisfaction about each of these three areas. First, my publications deal with civil-military relations and national security policy. I expect to continue thinking and writing about these things in what I and perhaps others have called the hybrid era, a complex security environment beyond the postmodern military, requiring both old and new thinking. I will also consider the military implications of new security challenges and how they can be met effectively with minimal harm to the values we hold dear. I can almost hear you thinking, good luck with that. Since we cannot predict the precise challenges ahead, it is all the more important that knowledgeable people with humane values think hard about them. Mark Twain once supposedly said, although no one can find it in his writings, but it's such a good quote, people use it, that history does not repeat itself, but it sometimes rhymes. All the fault lines of recent history, such as Pearl Harbor, the demise of the Soviet Union, and indeed September 11th, could have been predicted if the relevant indicators had not been buried in the weeds of simultaneous events. Roberta Wohlstetter's observations concerning Pearl Harbor remain relevant today as we wonder what indicators are we missing today that would alert us to some strategic surprise awaiting us. We need to lead the conversations about this. Second, I've had the privilege of touching the lives of many students, hopefully for the better. Several of you are here today, and I like to think that I made some contribution to the success that you are having. I know I have to share credit for this with Sam Sarkeesian, which I'm most happy to do. You have enriched my life greatly, and I'm very proud of all of you. Third, I like to think that in my work with the IUS, I've helped nourish the high intellectual standards that are the key to our success. At the same time, we do not dwell in Plato's ethereal world of the forms, and I have to deal with practical matters as well. We can think all the great thoughts we want to, but keeping this organization afloat is very expensive. Unlike many academic societies, we are now on a solid financial footing. That has been a constant struggle for the last 3 decades, and I'm happy to say that we are well positioned for the future. I am deeply grateful to all who have helped me professionally along the way. If you heard my Navy retirement speech, my comments about Sam Sarkeesian and Charlie Moskowitz I'm about to make will echo. When I plagiarize myself, I always do. Morris Janowitz founded this organization and the discipline of military sociology itself. I did not have the privilege of working closely with Morris for long because the physical infirmities that would eventually bear him away were already apparent when we met. I observed the full force of his genius, however, and that is not a term I use lightly or often. He got the IUS off to a great start, and subsequent chairs have wisely shared his view that our success required us to maintain the most rigorous social science standards. On that strong basis, we have weathered academic and financial storms over the years that sometimes pose a significant danger to us, and many of which were not apparent, I hope, to the fellows. Sam Sarkeesian, retired Lieutenant Colonel of Infantry of 10th Special Forces, 11th Airborne, hired me at Loyola University in Chicago, gave me my start in military studies, and served as a constant inspiration as a soldier, scholar, teacher, mentor, officer, and friend. I never met a finer officer. Indeed, he was the epitome of an officer and a gentleman, and of a soldier scholar. Charlie Moskowitz, former draftee and perceptive commentator on the role of the military in a free society, combined rigorous academic standards with practical policy advice and a human touch. More than anyone I can think of, he spoke truth to power and power to simple. The internationalization of the IUS was very important to him, and he did much to advance it. When I grow up, I still want to be Charlie. David Siegel, a social scientist and humanist of the first rank, combines intellectual rigor with the concern for institutions and the people in them. His empathy for soldiers and their families is strongly reflected in the corpus of his work. He is also on speed dial from government agencies and the media seeking his advice on personnel matters of the greatest importance. I owe a special debt of gratitude to David for recruiting Pat Shields as editor of Armed Forces and Society. The key to administrative success is to find very talented people willing to help realize the shared vision and leave them alone to do it. Dr. Sandy Stanley has done wonderful work organizing our conferences since 1989 and deserves much credit for this success. Our journal editors have fanned the intellectual flames and bolstered the role of Armed Forces and Society as the premier journal in our field. Our secretariat managers have done great service in dealing with the myriad details required to keep us moving ahead. Our partnership with Sage Publishers enhances the scholarly impact of our journal and has many benefits of a more practical sort. You don't need to know me well to realize that the things that have always meant the most to me throughout my life are my family and my happy home. I was very fortunate that Karen was dating one of my best friends in high school, and that we met one day picking her up from work. To say I was smitten would be a serious understatement. Unfortunately, my future bride was not similarly smitten. I had to work on that. Karen, our happy marriage is at the center of my life, and I give thanks every day for that life and for the family that we share. As was true with my Navy service, I have received far more from my work with the IUS than I could ever have put into it. Here, I'm surrounded by scholars of all ages and disciplines whose work I admire and whose good judgment of me I cherish. As Morris Janowitz wrote for his retirement address in 1985, I love you all. Of course, he couldn't resist adding, some more than others. I would admit the qualifier and am proud to have had a hand in assisting you in your important work. I am delighted that Professor Jim Burk has agreed to step forward as the 6th chair and president of the IUS. Jim has served in many capacities over the years as a member of our council, as editor of our journal, as chair of our publications committee, and as a wise and humane counselor on occasions too numerous to mention. A noted scholar with a well-deserved international reputation for excellence, Jim is admirably suited by ability and temperament to carry on the work begun over 50 years by Morris Janowitz and continued by Sam Sarkeesian, Charlie Moskos, David Siegel, and, I hope, by me. Jim, under your leadership, the best years of the IUS lie ahead. The IUS is a remarkable intellectual community, non-political, non-dogmatic, and united by the values of scholarship and service. It has been the privilege of my career to serve the IUS and the work of its fellows for 31 years. Many thanks to all of you for your friendship and support. Thank you. I stand relieved.
Let me begin by offering thanks to you, Jay, for your strong leadership of IUS and for your friendship over many years, and I hope for many years to come. I also want to thank the IUS staff who have worked so hard and so effectively to make this conference a success. I'm only beginning to understand the tremendous amount of work it is to ensure that this, using Jay's phrase, this party that we throw for ourselves every 2 years runs without a hitch. Jay has assembled a good team, and I'm happy to say that while Jay is stepping down, the team is not. Finally, I want publicly to thank my good wife, Trish, for her strong support for me, for her friendship, and for her strong support for IUS, its mission, and the work that we are doing. She is my rock and my compass. She is steadfast and a reliable guide. Thank you. Now, I don't want to spoil a good meal by making a long speech, but I do want to say some things. I do want to make a short speech about 3 challenges that we fellows of IUS currently face. The first challenge has to do with the continuing commitment to reform what has been a central mission of IUS. When the IUS was founded in 1960, it numbered about 12 university-based scholars. It quickly grew thereafter to the relatively large community of fellows that we are today. There are many reasons that explain this success. I want to highlight one. Namely, I want to highlight the role that IUS plays as a forum where university-based and social scientists, and military-based researchers and policy analysts can meet. IUS did not have to play this role, but from the start, Morris Janowitz believed the quality of our studies would be enriched if researchers from outside and from within the military regularly met to share ideas for research and to interpret the significance of work already done. Put simply, the IUS was concerned about how to keep a gap from dividing the civilian and military spheres, and he was concerned about this before the gap had a name. This was, and to some extent, remains difficult to do, closing this gap. In the 1960s, when the Vietnam War bred distrust between the military and civilians, efforts to bridge the gap were especially difficult. Even now, though, we have to be vigilant as we see how economic woes afflicting governments translate into uncertain support for attending our conferences. Nevertheless, carrying on the dialogue between researchers in the military and without is a hallmark of our success. It is central to our mission. Our challenge is to facilitate this dialogue even in hard times, inventing, if we must, new ways of doing so. The second challenge is an intellectual one. The challenge is to solve what some believe is a problem and others think is no problem at all in the field of civil-military relations. Here's an example. Sometimes leaders of liberal democracies decide too easily and imprudently to make war. That is their right, some say. Civilians have the right to be wrong about the use of armed force. Between civilian elites and political elites, civilians do have the right to decide. But what if the debate is between political leaders and the people they lead? Who then gets to decide? The question is important to answer because in our era of protracted wars, war powers have been accumulating for a long time in the executive branch of government. In the United States, it's well documented that presidential deference to the war powers of Congress have eroded throughout the 20th century. Over the same period, the president's war-making powers have grown. The founders did not anticipate this development in exactly the way it occurred, but they've opened the door for it when they failed to specify what the president's power as commander-in-chief should do. Abraham Lincoln knew why this development was a danger. In a letter written in 1848 to his friend, William Herndon, Lincoln wrote, if you allow the president to invade a neighboring nation whenever he will deem it necessary to repel an invasion, and you allow him to do so whenever he may choose to say he deems it necessary, and you allow him to make war at pleasure. Study to see, he said, study to see if you can fix any limit to his power. Well, we may suppose that this is no problem, that the young Lincoln oversimplified matters. It is harder than Lincoln thought for presidents or any head of state to make war at pleasure. Think only about this summer's debates about the use of force against Syria. But if we study the matter as students of the War Powers Resolution have done, we may come around to Lincoln's side. Few or none believe this resolution puts any serious limit on a president who wants to make war. There may be political limits. There may be limits based on partisanship or on other expediencies. But at the moment, some think there are no legal or constitutional limits to keep presidents from starting war. The challenge is to know what's really so. How can we know? Why does it matter? IUS fellows, I think, are pledged to tackle such questions. We're not pledged to answer one way or the other. but we're pledged to tackle the questions. We are guided by the old-fashioned but still worthy aim to clarify and improve public debate. That is our second challenge. The third challenge we face is to identify emerging issues affecting relationships between armed forces and society in ways that have not been deeply studied before. The challenge is not simply to carry on a tradition. The challenge is to take the tradition in a new direction, to reform the tradition. This isn't easy to do, yet it can be done. This is what Morris Janowitz did with his 5 working hypotheses stated in The Professional Soldier. This is what Charlie Moskos did when he formulated the institutional occupational thesis. Over many years, Charlie refined his ideas with help from Jay Williams and David Siegel, and with help from many others sitting here in this room. You all turned the IO thesis into an argument about the postmodern military, which is, I don't think, quite so dead as Jay's remarks would lead us to believe. This is what all of us do, to some degree, when we think about the significance of our research and we publish the results of what we have learned. It is our job to push the limits of what we know. Consider, for instance, the traditional pattern of mobilizing society for war. That traditional pattern entails raising manpower and raising money to fight. But this traditional pattern did not hold for the 9/11 wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. Why not? It may be too soon to know. But if leaders are rational, they calculated that mobilizing mass armed forces and raising taxes to pay the war's expense were not necessary to accomplish their aims. Does that mean that no mobilization was required? That would be a hasty conclusion. What has been mobilized for the 9/11 wars was not people so much, not money so much. What was mobilized was information. The U.S. Patriot Act passed on October 26, 2001 nicely illustrates the point. The act was all about mobilizing information to protect the United States and others from another terrorist attack. The act authorized extensive gathering of information from intelligence agencies and local police, from banks and librarians, from telephone and email traffic at home and abroad, of citizens and aliens alike. The act also imposed a gag order to prevent those turning over information from telling anyone that they had done so. This is not to mention less public authorization that allowed gathering information from military detainees by means of enhanced interrogation. These acts impose real political sacrifice of basic liberties of speech, of protections against unwarranted searches and seizures, curtailment of rights of privacy, weakened protection against cruel and unusual punishments. If so, this mobilization of information marks a sea change in the culture of war, a sea change in which security counts for more and liberty counts for less. And maybe it should. It is a matter that requires study, serious study, by serious scholars who maintain a civil outlook in their conversations and arguments with one another, as I think we do at IUS. This is just one example of a forward-looking research that IUS fellows are, I think, challenged to do. So there are then at least these 3 challenges that we face: to build bridges between the military and civilian spheres, to clarify public debates about policies currently affecting civil-military relations, and to identify new issues that will upset traditional ways that armed forces and society are related. IUS fellows met these challenges successfully in the past. I am confident that we too will face them with equal or greater success as we move forward into the future. Thank you.